Poor Maid accidentally sees Mafia boss changing. Her life changes forever. Through the smoke-filled streets, Ava ran. Her legs burned with each step, and her heart thundered against her ribs like a trapped bird seeking escape. The city, her city, was ablaze. Orange flames licking at the night sky, turning it into a hellish canvas of red and black. She stumbled, her shoulder hitting rough brick as she caught herself. Through watering eyes, she could see Marco's mansion in the distance, its imposing silhouette now crowned with flames that seemed to reach for the stars. The sight of it brought back memories she couldn't suppress. Memories of the first day she'd walked through those ornate doors, unaware that her life would never be the same. The smoke stung her eyes, making them water, but she couldn't look away from the burning building. How different it had looked that first morning when she'd arrived with her cleaning supplies and a desperate need for this job. The mansion had gleamed in the morning sun, all polished marble and pristine windows. She remembered how her hands had trembled as she'd rang the doorbell, clutching her reference letter like a shield. The crack of gunfire in the distance made her flinch. Sirens wailed through the city, their sound distorted by the thick smoke that hung in the air like a shroud. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself. Not when she'd been assigned to clean the east wing of the mansion. Not when she'd first caught Marco's dark gaze across his private study. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. Marco. Even now, his name sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered their first encounter with painful clarity, the way he'd stood there, shirt unbuttoned, revealing the stark black lines of his tattoos. The shock in his eyes had quickly turned to something else, something that had made her breath catch in her throat. She should have run then, should have quit that very day, but she hadn't. A series of explosions rocked the night, and Ava pressed herself against the wall of a building, her heart racing. The heat from the fires made sweat trickle down her back, soaking through her thin blouse. The same blouse she'd been wearing when Marco had finally revealed the truth about who he was, about the dangerous game he was playing. "You're part of this now," he'd told her, his voice like gravel, his hands gentle despite the blood on his knuckles. "There's no walking away." She'd thought she understood what he meant then. She hadn't. Not really. Not until she'd discovered the truth about her father, about the web of lies and betrayal she'd been born into. The smoke grew thicker, making it harder to breathe. Each inhale felt like swallowing fire. She pushed away from the wall, forcing herself to keep moving. The sound of breaking glass somewhere behind her spurred her forward. She couldn't stay here, couldn't let them find her. Her legs trembled with exhaustion as she ran, her shoes slapping against the pavement. The city she'd grown up in had become a war zone, and she was caught in the middle of it all. Because of Marco. Because of her father. Because of choices made long before she'd ever stepped foot in that mansion. Another explosion lit up the night sky, closer this time. The force of it knocked her off balance. As she stumbled into a narrow alley, her lungs finally gave out. She collapsed against the cold ground, choking on the thick smoke that seemed to fill every space, every breath. Through the haze, she could see him, Marco, standing amidst the flames like some avenging angel, his silhouette dark against the inferno he'd created. His victory would come at a price. It always did. The image burned itself into her mind as she fought for breath, a reminder of everything that had led to this moment. The morning sun streamed through the towering windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Ava methodically swept. The gentle swish of bristles against stone echoed through the grand halls, a rhythmic sound that usually brought her peace. But today, something felt different in the air. Heavier, like the calm before a storm. She paused near one of the tall windows, allowing herself a moment to take in the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers hung from carved ceilings, their delicate prisms throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. Original paintings, worth more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes, lined the hallway. Everything about the mansion spoke of old money and power. The other maids had warned her about this place when she'd first started 3 weeks ago. They'd whispered about its owner, Marco Rinaldi, and the things he'd done to build his empire. "Don't look him in the eye," they'd said. "Don't speak unless spoken to." Their warnings had painted a picture of a monster, but Ava couldn't reconcile those stories with the glimpses she'd caught of him, always from a distance, always brief. She'd seen him in his study late at night, his sharp profile illuminated by lamplight as he pored over documents. She'd watched him walk the grounds early in the morning, his shoulders carrying an invisible weight. There was something in his solitude that called to her, something that made her wonder if the rumors were true. Ava resumed her sweeping, moving down the hallway with practiced efficiency. The mansion was quiet at this hour, most of the staff busy in other wings. She preferred it this way, just her and her thoughts, the simple task of keeping this beautiful prison clean. The marble floor reflected her image as she worked, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, simple black uniform pressed and proper. She looked exactly as she should, invisible, unremarkable, safe. Yet, sometimes, when she caught her reflection in the polished surfaces of this place, she hardly recognized herself. Something about working here had changed her, made her more aware of the shadows that lived at the edges of ordinary life. A door clicked shut somewhere down the hall, the sound sharp in the morning quiet. Ava's hands tightened on the broom handle, but she kept sweeping, kept her movements steady and purposeful. The soft fall of footsteps grew closer, expensive shoes on marble, unhurried and confident. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to maintain her rhythm. She knew those footsteps, had memorized their cadence without meaning to. Marco was approaching, and for the first time, there was no one else in the hallway, nowhere to disappear to. She kept her eyes down, focused on the repetitive motion of the broom. The footsteps drew closer, and with them came the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, like gunpowder and danger. Marco passed by her, his presence filling the hall like a physical force. Despite her best intentions, despite every warning she'd been given, Ava's eyes lifted. Their gazes met, and the world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. His eyes were dark, bottomless pools that held secrets she couldn't begin to understand. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to step closer, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Ava quickly looked away, her cheeks burning, her hands trembling slightly on the broom handle. But she could feel it, a pull toward him that defied logic or reason. It was desire mixed with fear, attraction tangled with survival instinct. Even as his footsteps continued down the hall, she could feel the weight of his presence, the dangerous allure of the man who owned not just this mansion, but the very ground it stood on. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Ava gathered her cleaning supplies. Her supervisor had given her one final task. Marco Rinaldi's private quarters needed attention before the day ended. The thought made her pulse quicken, remembering their brief encounter in the hallway that morning. "He won't be there," the supervisor had assured her. "Mr. Rinaldi is in meetings until evening." Ava's footsteps echoed softly as she climbed the grand staircase to the east wing. This part of the mansion felt different, more intimate, more forbidden. The air itself seemed charged with an unseen energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. She paused at the heavy wooden door, taking a deep breath before inserting the key she'd been given. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet hallway. Ava pushed the door open slowly, her cleaning caddy held close to her chest like a shield. The room beyond was bathed in amber light from floor-to-ceiling windows. It was masculine and elegant. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, and walls lined with books. The space smelled of him, that mix of expensive cologne and danger that had haunted her thoughts all day. She took one step inside and froze. Marco stood by an open wardrobe, his broad shoulders bare, a crisp white shirt held in his hands. He turned at the sound of her entrance, his dark eyes finding hers with laser-like intensity. Time seemed to stop, the air between them growing thick with tension. Ava's mouth went dry. She should leave. Every instinct screamed at her to back away and run. But her feet remained rooted to the spot, her eyes unable to break away from his. The lean muscles of his torso caught the sunlight, and a large tattoo sprawled across his right shoulder, disappearing down his arm. Beautiful and dangerous, just like the man himself. Out. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that made her shiver. Now. She should move. She should apologize and flee. But something in his gaze held her there, a flicker of something beyond the cold command, something that made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I was told you wouldn't be here. Marco took a step toward her, and Ava's breath caught in her throat. He moved like a predator, all contained power and lethal grace. The distance between them shrank, and she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Are you deaf? He asked, his Italian accent more pronounced now, roughening his words. Or just stupid? The insult should have stung, should have broken whatever spell held her there. Instead, Ava found herself studying the contradiction before her, the elegant arch of his cheekbones against the brutal set of his jaw, the sophisticated room around them versus the violence she knew those hands were capable of. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Something shifted in his expression, the smallest crack in his cold facade. For just a moment, his gaze softened, traveling over her face with what might have been curiosity or wonder. Ava's heart thundered in her chest. The cleaning caddy slipped slightly in her sweaty palms, and the small sound seemed to break whatever moment had formed between them. She watched as his walls slammed back into place, his expression hardening once more. She turned then, finally able to move, and stepped back through the doorway. But even as she pulled the door closed behind her, she could feel the lingering electricity in her veins, the ghost of his gaze on her skin. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this moment had changed everything, that she would never see the world or herself quite the same way again. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as Ava went about her duties. 3 days had passed since the incident in Marco's private quarters, but the memory of his bare skin and intense gaze refused to leave her thoughts. She scrubbed the kitchen counter with more force than necessary, trying to focus on anything else. "You'll wear a hole through it," Maria, one of the older maids, commented with a knowing smile. Ava forced her hands to still. "Just being thorough." Throughout the day, she caught glimpses of Marco, in the study discussing business, striding through the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear, giving quiet orders to his men in Italian. Each time her heart would skip, and she'd quickly look away, but not before noticing how his presence seemed to fill every room he entered. As evening approached, Ava worked her way through the upper floor, dusting the elaborate artwork that lined the walls. The mansion grew quieter as other staff members finished their shifts and left for the day. She preferred these peaceful moments when the house settled into silence. The sound of voices drifting from Marco's study made her pause. His door was slightly ajar, golden lamplight spilling into the darkened hallway. She knew she should keep walking, but something in his tone made her hesitate. "They're getting bolder," Marco was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "First the warning at the warehouse, now this threat against Sofia." "We could move her to the safe house in Milan," another man suggested. "No." Marco's response was immediate and firm. "I won't have my sister living in hiding. She's all I have left after." He broke off, and Ava heard the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "After what happened to Isabella and the baby, I swore no one would touch my family again." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. "A baby?" The pain in Marco's voice was raw, exposing a wound that seemed to run deep. "The Castellanos think they can use her to get to me," Marco continued. "They don't understand that threatening my family is a death sentence. I've worked too hard to build this legitimate business, to create something clean for Sofia's future. I won't let them destroy it." Ava's mind raced. The rumors about Marco painted him as a cold-blooded killer, but this was different. This was a man fighting to protect what remained of his family, trying to build something better from the ashes of tragedy. She backed away from the door, but her elbow knocked against a vase. It wobbled, and she caught it before it could fall, but the movement had made enough noise to draw attention. "Check the hallway," Marco ordered sharply. Ava turned and walked quickly toward the stairs, her heart pounding. She made it around the corner just as she heard the study door open fully. She didn't stop moving until she reached the ground floor, slipping out through the kitchen door into the cool evening air. The massive iron gates that surrounded the property loomed before her, their elaborate scrollwork a reminder of the gilded cage she found herself in. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the gate and the street beyond. Everything felt different now. She wasn't just a maid cleaning a wealthy man's home. She was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous and complex. "Going somewhere?" Marco's voice behind her made her spine stiffen. She turned slowly to face him, finding him standing at the bottom of the steps. The security lights cast harsh shadows across his face, but his eyes burned with intensity as they studied her. The security lights cast harsh shadows across Marco's face as he stood before Ava, his presence both intimidating and magnetic. Without a word, he gripped her elbow, not roughly, but with enough force to make his intention clear, and led her back inside. They passed through dimly lit corridors until they reached his study, a room that smelled of leather and expensive whiskey. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Ava lowered herself into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room felt smaller with him in it, as if his presence consumed all the available space. Marco didn't sit behind his desk as she expected. Instead, he leaned against it, directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "You were listening earlier." It wasn't a question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," He held up a hand, silencing her. "What you heard." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "There are things you need to understand about who I am, what I do." Ava watched as he moved to pour 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He handed her one, which she accepted with trembling fingers. "Everyone thinks they know who Marco Rinaldi is," he continued, his voice low and controlled. "The brutal mafia boss, the monster who rules through fear." He gave a bitter laugh. "It's useful, that reputation. It keeps certain people in line. But it's not the whole truth." He took a long drink before setting his glass down with deliberate care. "My grandfather built this empire from nothing. Not just the criminal enterprise. Legitimate businesses, real estate, technology, banking. When my parents died, I inherited both sides of it, the clean and the dirty." Ava noticed how his jaw tightened when he mentioned his parents. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand." His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Everything I do, every threat I make, every violent act, it's not about power. It's about protection. I'm using the Mafia's influence to shield our legitimate businesses while I transition everything clean. But there are powerful people who want to keep us in the shadows, who profit from the corruption." He moved closer, and Ava had to resist the urge to lean back. "The man they think I am, the ruthless killer. It's a mask I wear to keep my enemies at bay while I build something better. Something my sister can be proud of. Something—" He hesitated, and for a moment, pain flickered across his features. "Something my daughter would have been proud of." The weight of his confession hung in the air between them. Ava's mind raced, trying to reconcile this version of Marco with the rumors she'd heard. The dangerous mafia boss was still there in his commanding presence, but now she saw something else. A man carrying an impossible burden, fighting a war on multiple fronts. "Why tell me?" she whispered. Marco's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because you saw something different in me. That day in my room, you didn't look at me with fear. And now you know too much to stay ignorant of the truth." Ava's heart pounded in her chest. Everything she thought she knew about him was shifting, transforming into something more complex, more human. The attraction she felt toward him hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger with this glimpse of vulnerability. But with that attraction came danger. If what he said was true, he was fighting powerful enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use anyone close to him as leverage. She stared into her untouched drink, watching the light play across its surface. Trust him or run? Both choices carried their own risks. The man before her was either telling her the truth, sharing a burden few others knew, or he was manipulating her emotions for his own purposes. The study door burst open, making Ava jump. Sofia Rinaldi rushed in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her face was pale, hands trembling as she clutched her phone. "Marco," Sofia's voice cracked. "They sent another message." The transformation in Marco was instant. The vulnerability that had softened his features moments ago vanished, replaced by cold fury. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking the phone from his sister's shaking hands. Ava watched as Marco's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck growing taut. Without warning, he hurled the phone against the wall. It shattered, pieces scattering across the floor. "They won't touch you," he growled, pulling Sofia into a protective embrace. "I won't let them." Sophia buried her face in her brother's chest, her shoulders shaking. Ava felt like an intruder witnessing this private moment, but she couldn't look away. The tenderness in Marco's touch as he stroked his sister's hair stood in stark contrast to his reputation.
"The Russo family,"
Sophia explained, turning to face Ava.
"They think they can force Marco's hand by threatening me. They've been trying to take over our legitimate businesses for years."
"Sophia," Marco warned, but she continued.
"No, Marco. She needs to understand."
Sophia's eyes met Ava's.
"My brother isn't the monster everyone thinks he is. Everything he does, the violence, the threats, it's all because of me. Because they won't stop coming after me to get to him."
The pieces clicked into place in Ava's mind. The security details she'd noticed around the mansion, the way Marco's men shadowed Sophia everywhere she went, the tension that never left Marco's shoulders. It all centered around protecting his sister. A sudden explosion rocked the mansion, sending books tumbling from their shelves. The security alarm blared through the speakers, its harsh wail filling the air. Marco immediately pushed Sophia behind him, drawing a gun from beneath his jacket. "Get them to the safe room," he barked at one of his men who appeared in the doorway. "Now!" Rough hands grabbed Ava's arm, pulling her toward the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs as gunfire erupted somewhere in the distance. The acrid smell of smoke began to fill the air. "Marco!" she called out, but he was already moving in the opposite direction, his gun raised. The guard hustled Ava and Sophia through a maze of corridors, downstairs she didn't know existed. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew louder. Glass shattered, men shouted, and more explosions shook the building's foundation. They were halfway down a narrow hallway when two masked figures appeared ahead of them. The guard shoved both women behind him, reaching for his weapon. But before he could draw, Marco materialized from a side passage. What happened next burned itself into Ava's memory. Marco moved with lethal grace, his actions precise and brutal. In seconds, both attackers lay motionless on the floor. His knuckles were bloody, his suit pristine except for a few drops of red on his white shirt. When he turned to them, his eyes were dark with rage, but they softened fractionally when they landed on Ava. He crossed to her in 2 steps, his hand coming up to cup her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence she'd just witnessed. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Ava shook her head, unable to find her voice. Her whole body trembled, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Get them secured," Marco ordered the guard. "I'll deal with the rest." As the guard ushered them toward the safe room, Ava glanced back. Marco stood in the hallway, his shoulders set in a hard line, surrounded by the aftermath of violence. In that moment, she understood with crystal clarity. There was no walking away from this. She was caught in Marco's world now, trapped between the man who could kill without hesitation and the one who touched her with such tenderness. The heavy door of the safe room sealed behind them with a metallic click, leaving Ava and Sophia in reinforced silence, waiting for whatever would come next. The night air filled with gunfire and shouts. Ava pressed herself against the wall of the mansion's kitchen, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The security system blared through hidden speakers, its harsh tone mixing with the chaos outside. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Heavy boots thundered down hallways. This attack was different from the last, more organized, more brutal. Through the window, she glimpsed dark figures moving across the grounds with military precision. "Move!" Marco's voice cut through the din. He appeared in the doorway, his white shirt stained with blood, though Ava couldn't tell if it was his own. "Get to the—" An explosion rocked the east wing of the mansion, cutting off his words. The force knocked Ava to her knees. Smoke began pouring through the ventilation system, thick and acrid. Marco grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. His touch was rough but steady, his eyes scanning constantly for threats. "Stay close," he ordered, leading her toward what she hoped was safety. They made it 3 steps before gunfire erupted in the hallway. Marco shoved her behind a marble column, shielding her with his body. The warmth of him pressed against her, his cologne mixing with gunpowder and smoke. "When I move, run for the study," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't stop, don't look back." Before she could protest, he was gone, engaging the attackers with lethal efficiency. Ava ran, her feet carrying her through the smoke-filled corridor. Behind her, she heard the sickening sounds of Marco's violence, the crack of bones, the wet impact of fists, the gurgling gasps of dying men. She reached the study door, yanking it open, only to find herself face to face with one of the intruders. His mask couldn't hide the cruel smile in his eyes as he raised his gun. Time seemed to slow. Ava's body froze, her mind blank with terror. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the slight movement that would end her life. Then Marco was there. He moved like a shadow given form, like death itself. One moment the gunman was aiming at her, the next he was on the ground, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Marco stood over him, chest heaving, his usually perfect hair falling across his forehead. More attackers appeared at the end of the hall. Marco grabbed Ava, pulling her into the study and slamming the door. He moved with practiced efficiency, activating some hidden mechanism that made metal shutters slam down over the windows. "Stay behind me," he growled, positioning himself between her and the door. His gun appeared in his hand, steady despite the chaos around them. The door burst open. Marco's weapon barked 3 times, the sound deafening in the confined space. 3 bodies hit the floor. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant sounds of fighting. Marco turned to her, his eyes wild with something primal. Fear mixed with rage, mixed with need. His hands found her face, surprisingly gentle as they checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. Ava shook her head, unable to speak. Her whole body trembled, adrenaline making her dizzy. Marco pulled her against him, one arm wrapping around her waist while the other kept his weapon ready. She felt the slight tremor in his hands, the only sign that the fight had affected him at all. "You're mine now," he said, his voice low and fierce. "No one touches you." The words should have frightened her. They should have made her want to run. Instead, they sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Pressed against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, Ava knew there was no going back. Her old life, her normal world, it was gone. She was part of Marco's dangerous reality now, bound to him by something stronger than choice. Ava's rubber gloves squeaked against the polished mahogany of Marco's desk. The morning sun streamed through bulletproof windows, casting shadows across the expensive furniture and artwork that filled his office. 2 weeks had passed since the attack, and the mansion's damage had been meticulously repaired, as if violence had never touched these walls. She worked methodically, careful not to disturb the papers scattered across the desk's surface. Numbers and names caught her eye, legitimate businesses mixed with others she suspected weren't quite legal. This was her new routine, cleaning Marco's private spaces while trying to ignore the electric charge in the air whenever he was near. The door opened. Marco strode in, phone pressed to his ear, barely acknowledging her presence. But Ava felt it, the shift in the air, the way her skin prickled with awareness. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in a year, the fabric pulled taut across his broad shoulders. "The shipment needs to be clean," he said into the phone, his voice carrying that edge of authority that made even his most casual words sound like commands. "I won't risk exposure, not with things so unstable." Ava kept her head down, pretending to focus on a stubborn spot of ink, but her ears strained to catch every word, every nuance in his tone. Living in the mansion had taught her to read the subtle signs of trouble, the tightening around Marco's eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he was worried. He paced behind his desk, tension radiating from his powerful frame. "Double the security detail. No, triple it. I don't care what it costs." A pause. "Because my sister's life is worth more than money." Ava's hands stilled. Sophia, the heart of everything Marco did. She'd seen the younger woman around the mansion, beautiful and fragile-looking, always accompanied by armed guards. The way Marco looked at his sister spoke of love and guilt in equal measure. "Nothing happens to her," Marco continued, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Nothing. Or I'll personally ensure everyone involved regrets being born." The threat in his words sent a shiver down Ava's spine, but it wasn't fear she felt. It was something else, something that made her breath catch when Marco's dark eyes finally met hers across the desk. He ended the call, sliding the phone into his pocket with deliberate slowness. "Find anything interesting in those papers, Ava?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. Of course he'd noticed her attention to his documents. He noticed everything. "No, sir. Just cleaning." "Sir?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You don't have to call me that anymore. You're not just the help now." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. What was she then? A prisoner? A protectee? Something else entirely? The question burned in her throat, but she didn't dare ask it. Marco moved closer, his presence filling her senses. He smelled of expensive cologne and something darker, more dangerous. "You've been watching me," he said softly. "Learning my routines, my business." Ava swallowed hard. "It's hard not to notice things, living here." "And what have you noticed?" "Everything," she wanted to say. "The way you check on Sophia 3 times a day, how you never sleep more than 4 hours, the sadness in your eyes when you think no one's looking." Before she could answer, Marco's phone buzzed again. His expression darkened as he read the message. "We'll continue this conversation later," he said, already moving toward the door. But he paused, glancing back at her. "Be careful what you choose to notice in this house, Ava. Knowledge isn't always safe." The door closed behind him, leaving Ava alone with her thoughts and the echo of his words. Through the wall, she could hear him speaking urgently about increased patrols, secure routes, potential threats to Sophia's safety. Each word revealed another layer of the man she was coming to know. Not the cold-blooded mafia boss of rumors, but a brother willing to burn the world to protect what he loved. The envelope felt heavy in Ava's trembling hands. No return address, just her name, written in familiar handwriting she hadn't seen in 15 years. Her father's handwriting. She stood in her bedroom within Marco's mansion, the morning sun casting long shadows across the expensive carpet. The letter had been slipped under her door sometime during the night, bypassing Marco's strict security protocols. "This isn't possible," she whispered, running her finger over the seal. Her father had died when she was 16, or at least that's what she'd been told. The funeral had been closed casket, no body viewed. With shaking fingers, she tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Ava," it began, "I know this will come as a shock, but I'm alive. I've been watching you from afar, protecting you the only way I could, by staying away. But now you're in danger, caught in Marco Rinaldi's web, and I can't stay silent anymore. Meet me at St. Michael's Church at noon. Come alone. Your loving father." The paper crumpled in her fist. Memories flooded back. Her father's warm smile, his strong hands lifting her onto his shoulders, the sound of his laughter. But also the mysterious late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the way he'd sometimes come home with bruises he wouldn't explain. She glanced at her watch. 11:30 a.m. Ava knew she should tell Marco about the letter. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that she was betraying his trust by even considering meeting her father alone. But this was her father, the man who had raised her, who had taught her to ride a bike, who had held her when her mother died. The church loomed before her 30 minutes later, its stone facade weathered by time. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered, the sound echoing in the empty sanctuary. A figure sat in the last pew, head bowed as if in prayer. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. He turned, and Ava's heart stopped. 15 years had carved deep lines into his face, turned his hair gray. But those eyes, her eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "My little girl," he said, standing. "You've grown so beautiful." Ava wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms like she had as a child, but something held her back. "You were dead. We buried you." Unnecessary deception. He stepped closer, hands raised as if to embrace her, but stopped when she flinched. "I had enemies, Ava. Powerful ones. I had to disappear to protect you." "Enemies?" The word tasted bitter. "Like Marco Rinaldi?" A shadow crossed her father's face. "So you know who he really is." "I know he's not what people think." She lifted her chin. "He protects his family." "Is that what he told you?" Her father laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been watching him for years, working with others who know his true nature. He's a monster, Ava. Everything he touches turns to blood." The truth hit her like a physical blow. "You're working against him." "I'm trying to stop him." Her father's eyes blazed with conviction. Him and his whole criminal empire. We're close, so close to bringing him down. But seeing you in his house, under his control. He shook his head. "I had to reach out." "I'm not under his control," Ava protested, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Then prove it." Her father held out his hand. "Help me take him down. Help me expose what he really is. You must have access to his private files, his meetings, his plans." Ava stared at his outstretched hand, her mind spinning. This was her father, her blood, her family. But Marco had shown her his own vulnerability, had protected her, had made her feel things she'd never felt before. "I can't. I need time to think," she stammered. "Time is running out, sweetheart." Her father's voice hardened. "You have to choose. Your father, or the man who would use you as a pawn in his games. Family, or the monster who pretends to care about it." The choice stretched before her like an abyss. On one side, the father she'd mourned for 15 years. On the other, Marco. Complicated, dangerous, and increasingly essential to her heart. The evening shadows crept across Marco's office as Ava stood before his desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You met with someone today." It wasn't a question. His voice was soft, dangerous. Ava's throat went dry.
How did you?
"I know everything that happens in my territory." Marco rose from his chair, his movements fluid and controlled. Every meeting, every whispered conversation, every secret rendezvous in a church. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken threats. Marco circled his desk slowly, predator sizing up its prey. "Do you understand what it means to be in my world, Ava? To be close to me?" She swallowed hard. "I'm just a maid." "No." The word cut through the air like a knife. "You stopped being just a maid the moment you walked into my room that day. The moment I decided to keep you close." He stood before her now, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "My enemies will use anything, anyone, to destroy me. They'll tear apart everything I love, piece by piece."
Is that what I am?
Ava's voice trembled.
Something you love?
Marco's expression darkened. He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jaw. "You're something they can use against me. That makes you both valuable and vulnerable." The touch sent shivers down her spine. His hand dropped to her shoulder, and she felt the weight of his words settling over her like a shroud. "The people who want to hurt me," he continued, his voice low and intense. "They won't hesitate to torture you, to break you, to use you as bait. They'll make you suffer just to watch me bleed." Ava's mind flashed to her father's words in the church. Was he one of these enemies Marco spoke of? The thought made her stomach churn.
"I don't want this life,"
she whispered. "It's not about what you want anymore." His grip tightened slightly. "You're part of this now. The only choice you have is whether you'll let me protect you or try to run." His eyes bore into hers. "And Ava, running won't save you. It'll only make you an easier target." She watched as he moved to the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the weariness she'd never noticed before. For a moment, he wasn't the fearsome Mafia boss. He was just a man, carrying the weight of countless lives on his shoulders. "I've lost too many people," he said quietly, almost to himself. "My parents, my child. Each death, each betrayal, carved away pieces of who I used to be." Ava found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. She'd never seen him like this, vulnerable, human. "The violence, the control, the fear I instill in others, it's all necessary. Not because I enjoy it, but because it's the only way to keep what's left of my family safe." He turned to her, and the anguish in his eyes made her heart ache. "I won't lose anyone else, Ava. Not you, not Sophia, not anyone under my protection." In that moment, Ava saw past the facade of the ruthless crime boss. She saw the scars left by loss, the desperate need to protect what remained. Despite every warning bell in her mind, despite her father's warnings, she felt her resolve weakening. Marco's pain called to something deep inside her, something that wanted to reach out and soothe the wounds that time hadn't healed. It was dangerous, she knew, to feel this way about a man like him. But standing there, watching him battle his demons, couldn't help but want to stay. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and the clink of expensive silverware. Ava sat beside Sophia at the white-clothed table, trying to enjoy their rare moment of normalcy outside the mansion. Marco sat across from them, his presence commanding even in this peaceful setting. Sophia laughed at something Ava said, the sound bright and genuine. It was easy to forget in moments like these, the danger that lurked around every corner. But Marco never forgot. His eyes constantly scanned the room, his body tense despite his relaxed facade. The first gunshot shattered everything. Glass exploded as bullets tore through the restaurant's windows. Marco moved with inhuman speed, launching himself across the table and tackling Sophia to the ground. "Down!" he roared at Ava, who was already dropping to the floor. Screams filled the air. The pristine restaurant dissolved into chaos as people scrambled for cover. Through the confusion, Ava saw them, men in dark suits moving with military precision. "Get her out!" Marco commanded one of his guards, pointing at Sophia. His sister struggled against the guard's grip, reaching for Marco. "No, Marco, don't!" But Marco was already moving, his expression transformed into something terrifying. Gone was the man who had shared quiet moments with them at dinner. In his place stood someone else, someone deadly. The first attacker didn't even see Marco coming. One moment he was advancing, gun raised, and the next he was on the ground, neck twisted at an impossible angle. Marco moved like a shadow, each motion precise and lethal. Ava huddled behind an overturned table, unable to look away. She'd heard stories about Marco's capability for violence, but seeing it was different. He fought with cold efficiency, each movement designed to kill. When one of the attackers got too close to where Ava hid, Marco's reaction was swift and brutal. The man's screams cut off with a sickening crack. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. 6 bodies lay scattered across the restaurant's floor, blood seeping into the expensive carpet. Marco stood in the center of it all, his suit barely wrinkled, though specks of red stained his white shirt. His eyes found Ava's, and for a moment she saw fear there. Fear of what she'd witnessed, of how she'd react to this side of him. Hours later, back at the mansion, Ava found Marco in his study. He stood by the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "I lost my son 3 years ago," he said without turning. "He was 5. Ava's breath caught. She'd heard whispers about Marco's past, but never this. "They took him from his school." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. "I had enemies then, different ones than now. They wanted to send a message." The glass in his hand trembled slightly. "By the time I found him..." He closed his eyes, and Ava saw the pain etched into every line of his face. "That's why you're so protective of Sophia," she whispered. "I failed to protect my son." The words seemed to cost him something vital. "I won't fail again. Every person I care about." His eyes met hers in the reflection of the window. "Becomes a target. That's why I have to be what I am. Why I have to be capable of..." He gestured vaguely, referring to the violence she'd witnessed earlier. "The man you saw today," he continued, "the one who killed without hesitation. That's who I became after losing him. It's who I have to be." Ava moved closer, drawn by the raw anguish in his voice. She understood now. The constant vigilance, the brutal efficiency, the walls he built around himself. They weren't just the traits of a mafia boss. They were the shields of a father who'd lost everything once and refused to let it happen again. The night air carried the scent of jasmine through the mansion's garden. Ava wandered between the carefully manicured hedges, seeking solitude after the violence she'd witnessed earlier. The elegant stone pathways, usually so peaceful, felt different in the darkness, more dangerous, more alive with possibility. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Marco moved with that predatory grace she'd come to recognize, his presence filling the space between them. He'd changed from his blood-stained suit into a simple black shirt that made him look almost approachable. Almost. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low and rough. "I needed air." Ava wrapped her arms around herself, trying to suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night breeze. "After today." Marco stepped closer, and Ava's breath caught. The garden lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. "What you saw today," he started, then stopped, as if searching for words that wouldn't frighten her. "I'm not afraid of you," Ava whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. Something flickered in Marco's expression. Hunger, need, warning. "You should be." He moved closer still, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Everyone else is." "I'm not everyone else." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone she'd watched kill without mercy hours before. His thumb traced her bottom lip, and Ava's heart thundered in her chest. "No," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not." The tension between them stretched taut, electric. Ava knew she should step back, maintain the distance that had kept her safe these past weeks. But her body betrayed her, swaying toward him like a flower seeking sunlight. Marco's control, always so rigid, so absolute, cracked. He moved with that same deadly grace she'd witnessed earlier, but this time it was different. This time, his hands cradled her face as his lips crashed into hers. Kiss was everything she'd tried not to imagine. Passionate, demanding, desperate. Marco kissed like a man starved, like he was trying to devour her whole. His fingers tangled in her hair, holding her close as his mouth claimed hers with a possessiveness that made her knees weak. Ava's hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. He tasted like danger and whiskey and something uniquely him. Every sweep of his tongue, every subtle shift of his body against hers sent electricity racing through her veins. A soft moan escaped her, and Marco growled in response. He backed her against one of the garden's stone columns, his body caging her in. The cold stone against her back contrasted sharply with the heat of him pressed against her front. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent. Marco's hands skimmed down her sides, leaving trails of fire in their wake. Ava felt herself getting lost in him, in the way he made her feel both protected and endangered at the same time. Reality crashed back when Marco suddenly tensed, his body going rigid against hers. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark with want and warning. "We can't," he said, though his hands still gripped her hips like he couldn't bear to let go. Ava tried to catch her breath, her lips tingling from his kiss. "Marco." "Stay away from me, Ava." His voice was rough, pained. "I'm not good for you. The things I've done, the things I'll still have to do." He stepped back, creating physical distance even as his eyes devoured her. "You don't want this life." But as Ava stood there, her body still humming from his touch, she knew it was too late. She was already caught in his web, already in too deep to find her way back to the surface. The rational part of her mind screamed to run, to escape while she still could, but her heart knew better. She couldn't stay away from Marco any more than she could stop breathing. The letter sat on Ava's dresser like a ticking bomb. Her father's handwriting, once so familiar and comforting, now seemed foreign and threatening. She picked it up with trembling fingers, reading the words that had haunted her since their arrival yesterday. My dearest daughter, you need to understand who Marco Rinaldi really is. Meet me at our old spot, tomorrow, noon. Ava's stomach churned as she made her way to the small cafe where she and her father used to share Sunday breakfasts. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and there he sat, older, grayer, but still unmistakably her father. Ava. He stood, arms opening for an embrace she couldn't bring herself to return. His face fell, but he gestured to the seat across from him. Please, sit. She slid into the booth, keeping her back straight, her guard up. Why are you doing this? Her father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because I love you. Because I know what kind of man Marco Rinaldi is. He's not the protector you think he is. He's a killer. Monster who'll destroy everything he touches. You don't know him, Ava said, but doubt crept into her voice. I know him better than you think. Her father's eyes hardened. I worked for his family for years. I saw what they did to people who crossed them. Marco? He's the worst of them all. That tenderness he shows you, it's an act. He'll use you until he doesn't need you anymore, then discard you like everyone else. Ava's hands clenched under the table. If you know so much about him, why didn't you tell me before? Why let me work in his house? I've been gathering evidence against him for years, working with people who want to bring him down. But I need your help, Ava. You're close to him now. You want me to spy on him? The words tasted bitter in her mouth. I want you to help me protect you. Her father reached across the table, trying to take her hand. She pulled away. Think about it. The way he keeps you trapped in that mansion, how he controls every aspect of your life. That's not love, Ava. That's possession. Images flashed through her mind. Marco's gentle touch in the garden, the vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke about his sister, the raw pain when he revealed his past. But there were other memories, too. The cold efficiency with which he dealt with enemies, the darkness that sometimes clouded his gaze, the secrets she knew he still kept. What exactly do you want from me? She asked, hating how her voice shook. Her father pulled out a small USB drive. Information. Access to his private files. Anything that could help us bring him down legally. No one has to get hurt. Ava stared at the drive, feeling sick. And if I refuse? Then you're choosing him over your own blood. Over justice. Her father's expression hardened. He'll betray you, Ava. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but he will. Men like Marco Rinaldi don't change. They don't love. They possess. They control. They destroy. Ava stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need time to think. Don't take too long. Her father's words followed her as she fled the cafe. And Ava, be careful who you trust. Back at the mansion, Ava paced her room, her father's words echoing in her head. The weight of the decision crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. Finally, gathering her courage, she made her way to Marco's office. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening for a moment before he noticed her distress. What's wrong? I need the truth, Ava said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. About everything. About my father, about who you really are,
about what happened between you two.
Marco's face hardened, but he didn't look away. He stood slowly, walking around his desk until he stood before her. The truth isn't pretty, Ava.
I don't need pretty. I need honest.
Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or resignation. Your father betrayed my family years ago. His actions got people killed. But no matter what happened in the past, no matter what happens now, I will always protect you. That's my truth. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Ava stood in the hallway, watching Marco's silhouette as he paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, controlled, but she could sense the tension coiling beneath his surface. She pressed her hand against the wooden doorframe, remembering her father's words from their meeting. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, though she hadn't taken it. She'd left it on the cafe table, but its presence haunted her all the same. Marco ended his call and turned, catching her gaze through the doorway. "Come in," he said, his voice softer than before. Ava stepped into his office, noting the maps spread across his desk, the security reports stacked in neat piles. This was a man preparing for war, and she was caught in the middle of it. "You should be resting," he said, moving closer. His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. "It's early." "I couldn't sleep." Ava leaned into his touch despite herself. This was the contradiction that tormented her. How could hands capable of such violence also hold such tenderness? "You've been up all night." "There's work to be done." His jaw tightened. "The threats against Sophia are escalating. Someone's feeding our enemies information." Ava's heart clenched. She knew who that someone was, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she watched as Marco returned to his desk, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Let me help," she said, surprising herself. Marco looked up sharply. "This isn't your fight." "Isn't it?" Ava stepped closer, her fingers trailing along the edge of his desk. "I'm here, aren't I? In your home, in your life. The people targeting you won't make distinctions." "Which is exactly why you should stay out of it." Marco's voice held a warning edge. "I can protect you, but only if you let me." "And who protects you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marco's expression softened for a moment, and he reached for her hand. The touch sent electricity through her skin. "Come here," he said, pulling her around the desk. Ava allowed herself to be drawn into his arms, breathing in his scent, expensive cologne mixed with coffee and something uniquely him. His heart beat steady against her cheek, a rhythm that had become familiar, necessary. "I've survived this long," he murmured into her hair. "I know what I'm doing." But Ava could feel the weight he carried, the constant vigilance that kept him awake at night. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on as if she could anchor him to safety through sheer will. A commotion outside broke the moment. Marco tensed, already moving toward the door when his security chief burst in. "Sir," the man said, face grim, "you need to see this." He handed Marco a tablet. Ava watched as Marco's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. When he turned the screen toward her, her blood ran cold. There, on the front page of every major news outlet, was her father. He stood at a podium, cameras flashing, as he publicly accused Marco Rinaldi of multiple crimes. The headlines screamed of corruption, violence, and illegal business dealings. but it was the photos accompanying the articles that made Ava's knees weak. Private moments between her and Marco, taken without their knowledge. Her father had been watching, gathering evidence, using her presence in Marco's life as part of his attack. Marco set the tablet down with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was arctic. "Get everyone in position. Now." The security chief nodded and left quickly. Marco turned to Ava, his eyes searching her face. "Did you know?"
"No," she whispered, the truth raw in her throat. "I swear, Marco, I didn't know he would do this."
His expression softened fractionally. "I believe you." He cupped her face in his hands. "But things are going to get very dangerous now. Your father has made his choice." The first explosion rocked the mansion's foundation. Ava stumbled, catching herself against the wall as the chandelier above swayed dangerously. Gunfire erupted outside, a cacophony of violence that shattered the morning silence. Marco's security team burst into action. Men in black suits rushed past her, weapons drawn. Through the ornate windows, she saw cars screeching to a halt outside the gates, men pouring out with military precision. "Get to the safe room!" One of Marco's men grabbed her arm, but another explosion sent them both sprawling. Glass shattered, raining down in deadly shards. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Ava scrambled to her feet, her heart thundering against her ribs. The mansion's grand foyer had become a war zone. Marco's men took defensive positions behind pillars and overturned furniture. The rat-tat-tat of automatic weapons created a deafening symphony of destruction. She ran for the stairs, ducking as bullets splintered the wooden banister beside her. Halfway up, she froze. Sophia's room was on the other side of the mansion. The thought of Marco's sister, alone and vulnerable, made her change direction. The hallway stretched before her, a gauntlet of danger. She pressed herself against the wall, inching forward as the battle raged below. Through the windows, she could see more of Marco's enemies scaling the walls of the estate. They moved like shadows, precise and deadly. A hand grabbed her shoulder. Ava spun, ready to fight, but it was Marco. His usual immaculate appearance was gone, replaced by something darker, more primal. Blood spattered his white shirt. Whose blood, she couldn't tell. "What are you doing?" he growled, pulling her close. "The safe room is downstairs."
"Sophia
is already secure." His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "I would never leave her unprotected." Another explosion rocked the building. Marco's body covered hers instinctively, shielding her from falling debris. She felt the solid warmth of him, the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. "We need to move," he said, his voice rough against her ear. "Stay close." They made their way through the chaos, Marco's gun ready in his hand. Ava watched in equal parts horror and fascination as he dispatched two attackers without hesitation. His movements were fluid, lethal, the violence as natural to him as breathing. They reached a hidden panel in the library. Marco pressed something, and the wall slid open. But before they could enter, gunfire erupted from behind them. Marco pushed her behind a massive desk, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "When I say run, you run," he commanded, reloading with practiced ease. "Don't look back." More of Marco's men arrived, engaging the attackers. The library became a battlefield of bullets and blood. Expensive books exploded into confetti. Antique furniture splintered under the assault. Ava watched Marco transform completely into the Mafia boss everyone feared. He moved like a predator, each shot finding its mark. His face was a mask of cold fury as he protected what was his. "Run!" he shouted, laying down covering fire. Ava sprinted for the hidden door. Behind her, she heard Marco bark orders in Italian, heard the wet sounds of close combat. She reached the passage but couldn't bring herself to enter without him. Through the chaos, their eyes met. Even across the battlefield the library had become, she felt that magnetic pull between them. Marco's expression shifted, something primal and possessive flashing in his gaze. He fought his way to her, elegant even in violence. Blood dripped from a cut above his eye, but he seemed unaware of it. When he reached her, his hand closed around her arm with bruising intensity. "Mine," he growled, pulling her into the passage. As the wall sealed behind them, Ava heard the muffled sounds of the battle continuing. Marco's body pressed her against the narrow corridor's wall, his breathing heavy. In the dim emergency lighting, his eyes burned into hers. Blood and gunpowder clung to him, but underneath was that familiar scent that was purely Marco. His hand came up to cup her face, surprisingly gentle despite the violence they'd just escaped. "No one will ever take you from me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No one." The mansion hummed with tension as Marco's men prepared for war. Ava watched from the doorway of his study as he strapped on a bulletproof vest, his movements precise and controlled. Maps and surveillance photos covered his desk, intelligence gathered over months of planning. The air felt thick with anticipation. "You should be in the safe room," Marco said, without looking up, checking the magazine of his gun. His voice was low, dangerous, the voice of a man ready to kill. "I'm not hiding while you face my father." Ava stepped into the room, her heart pounding. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders. Everything she'd known, everything she'd believed about her life, had been a lie. Her own father had betrayed not just Marco, but her as well. Marco's jaw clenched. "This isn't a game, Ava. What's about to happen?" He finally looked at her, his eyes dark with barely contained violence. "You don't want to see this side of me." "I've already seen it." She moved closer, watching his fingers tighten on the weapon. "I've seen every side of you, Marco. The monster they fear, the brother who'd die for Sophia, the man who—" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "The man who what?" His voice was rough, challenging. "The man who made me fall in love with him." The admission hung between them. Marco's expression flickered, surprise, desire, and something darker passing over his features. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, his hand tangling in her hair as he pulled her close. "You could leave," he murmured against her temple. "Walk away from all of this. From me." "No." Ava pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the vest. "I couldn't." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as more of Marco's men arrived, their black SUVs forming a protective perimeter around the mansion. The sight sent a chill down Ava's spine. This was really happening. Marco's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression hardening. "They found them. Your father and his men are holed up in an abandoned warehouse by the docks." He looked at her again, studying her face. "Last chance to walk away." "I told you, I'm staying." He nodded once, decision made. "Then stay close to Antonio. He'll protect you." "I'm coming with you." "Ava."
"He's my father, Marco. Whatever happens, I need to see it. I need to understand."
Something dangerous flashed in Marco's eyes, but he nodded again. "Fine. But you do exactly what I say, when I say it. Understand? The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Marco's men moved with military precision, loading weapons and securing communications. Ava watched it all with a surreal sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie instead of her life. The convoy of black vehicles cut through the night like a deadly procession. Ava sat beside Marco in the lead SUV, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a maze of abandoned buildings and broken dreams. "They're here," Marco's driver announced, pointing to a hulking structure ahead. Security lights cast eerie shadows across its facade. Marco's phone buzzed again. He listened for a moment, his expression growing darker. "They know we're coming. They're waiting." Ava's heart clenched. "How many?" "Enough to make this interesting." He squeezed her thigh once before letting go. "Remember what I said. You stay back, no matter what happens." The vehicles stopped 2 blocks away. Marco's men deployed silently, taking up positions around the warehouse. Through her window, Ava could see snipers moving onto adjacent rooftops. This wasn't just an attack. It was an execution. Marco checked his weapon one final time. In the dim light of the SUV, his eyes met hers. "Whatever you see in there, remember one thing. Everything I do to protect what's mine." The first shots rang out before Ava could respond. The night erupted into chaos as Marco's men engaged the guards outside the warehouse. Through the bulletproof glass, she watched the deadly dance unfold. Marco's expression turned to stone as he opened his door. "Stay here until I signal. Antonio, keep her safe." Then he was gone, moving through the gunfire like a ghost. His men followed, a wave of black-clad figures advancing on the warehouse. Ava watched, her heart in her throat, as Marco disappeared into the building where her father waited. The warehouse air hung thick with gun smoke and tension. Ava pressed against the cold concrete pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs as shots echoed through the vast space. Marco's men had cleared most of the building, leaving only the main storage area where her father had retreated. Through the haze, she saw Marco move like a predator, his movements calculated and deadly. His usually immaculate suit was splattered with blood. Whose blood? She couldn't tell. The dim emergency lights cast harsh shadows across his face, transforming him into something otherworldly and terrifying. "Come out," Marco's voice carried through the warehouse. "Face me like a man, or I'll hunt down every last person you've ever cared about." Movement caught Ava's eye. Her father emerged from behind a stack of crates, his silver hair gleaming in the low light. He looked older than she remembered, more haggard, but his eyes held the same calculating gleam she remembered from childhood. "You were always too dramatic, Marco." Her father's voice was steady, despite the gun trained on him. "We could have worked together, built something greater than either of us could alone." "By betraying me?" Marco's laugh was cold. "By targeting Sophia? By using your own daughter as a pawn?" The words hit Ava like physical blows. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. Her father had known all along, had planned for her to work in Marco's house, to be close to him. "Ava was never supposed to be involved," her father protested, but his eyes flickered to where she stood. "She was meant to stay out of this." "Liar." Marco's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You've taken everything from me. Now, I take everything from you." The tension crackled between them. Ava saw her father's hand twitch toward his jacket, but Marco was faster. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Her father stumbled, red blooming across his chest. "You really think I wouldn't know about the wire?" Marco advanced on him. "About the police waiting outside? About the evidence you've been gathering for months?" Her father coughed, blood staining his lips. "You've gotten sloppy, Marco. Letting a woman make you weak." "No." Marco stood over him now. "She made me stronger. She showed me what I had to protect." His gun pressed against her father's temple. "And what I had to destroy." "Ava!" her father called out, his voice weaker now. "Bambina, help me, please." She stepped forward, torn between the man who raised her and the man she'd grown to love. Marco didn't move, didn't try to stop her as she approached. "You used me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "My whole life, you used me. Made me believe you were dead, then tried to use me against Marco." "Everything I did was for us, for our family." "No." Ava shook her head. "Everything you did was for power. You never cared about family." Marco's men appeared from the shadows, surrounding them. Through the warehouse windows, Ava could see police lights flashing, but they remained outside, bought off or warned away, she wasn't sure. "Your empire is gone," Marco told her father. "Your men are dead or have turned. The evidence you gathered? Destroyed. The police you paid? Working for me now." He smiled, cold and victorious. "You have nothing left." The final shot echoed through the warehouse. Ava didn't flinch. She watched as her father's body slumped, as Marco's men moved in to clean up the scene. In less than an hour, it would be as if nothing had happened here. Marco turned to his lieutenants. "Spread the word. Anyone who stood with him dies. Anyone who betrayed us dies. The old guard is finished." His voice carried through the warehouse. "This is my city now." Ava stood in the aftermath, watching as Marco's men carried out his orders. The Mafia world was changing tonight, shaped by violence and blood into something new. Something that belonged entirely to Marco. The city burned around them, smoke curling up into the night sky like twisted prayers. Ava stood at the window of Marco's penthouse, watching emergency vehicles' lights flash in the distance. The silk of her blouse still smelled of gunpowder and blood, a reminder of everything that had happened in the warehouse. Behind her, Marco moved silently, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. The ice clinked against crystal, a sound too civilized for hands that had dealt so much death tonight. Her father's blood was probably still beneath his fingernails. "Drink," he said, offering her a glass. His voice was softer now, the rage from earlier carefully contained. "It helps." Ava accepted the glass but didn't drink. The amber liquid caught the light, reminding her of the flames consuming half the city's underworld. Marco's retribution had been swift and absolute, not just her father, but everyone who had ever stood against him. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Marco moved closer, his presence both comforting and terrifying. "They chose their side, and I chose mine." Ava finally took a sip, letting the burn of alcohol ground her in the moment. "I chose you." Marco's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and steady. Through the reflection in the window, she could see his expression, that careful mix of tenderness and steel that made him who he was. The monster and the man, existing in the same dangerous package. "I never wanted this for you," he admitted. "When you first started working here, you were supposed to be invisible, just another maid. His fingers traced down her arm, leaving goosebumps in their wake. But you saw me. Really saw me. Ava turned to face him, studying the man who had turned her world upside down. His suit was immaculate again. He'd changed after the warehouse, but she could still see traces of violence in the way he held himself, ready for the next threat, the next battle.
I saw everything, she said. The way you protect Sophia, the way you fight for what's yours, the way you...
She swallowed hard.
The way you kill for it.
Does it frighten you? His dark eyes searched her face. What I'm capable of.
Yes.
There was no point in lying. Not now, not after everything.
But what frightens me more is how much I understand it. How much I wanted you to win tonight.
Marco took the glass from her hand, setting both drinks aside. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with surprising gentleness. This close, she could see the exhaustion beneath his controlled exterior, the weight of the empire he'd just solidified with blood and bullets. I will always win, he said, his voice low and intense. Anyone who threatens what's mine will burn. Anyone who tries to take you from me will die screaming. That's who I am, Ava. That's who I'll always be. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall.
I know. God help me, I know exactly who you are.
Her hands came up to grip his wrists, not pushing away, but holding on.
The man who reads to Sophia when she can't sleep. The man who remembers how I take my coffee. The man who kills without mercy to protect what he loves.
And you? His grip tightened slightly. Can you love a monster?
I already do.
The truth of it settled in her chest, heavy and permanent.
I loved you when you were just the mysterious boss I cleaned for. I loved you when I found out what you really were. I loved you tonight, watching you tear apart my father's world.
Marco's breath hitched, the only sign that her words had affected him. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. They stood like that, breathing the same air, while the city burned around them. All the power in the underworld was his now, bought with blood and secured with violence. You're mine, Ava. Forever. His words weren't a question or even a demand. They were simply truth, as unchangeable as gravity. Ava's heart ached with the knowledge that nothing would ever be simple again. But as she stood in Marco's arms, watching their reflection against the backdrop of a burning city, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The scent of gunpowder and blood lingered in the warehouse air. Ava stood at the top of the metal staircase, her hands gripping the railing as she watched Marco move through the carnage below. His men flanked him, their weapons still warm, but it was Marco who commanded every eye in the room. The rival family's representatives knelt before him, their faces marked with defeat and fear. Some still bore the bruises of resistance, while others had submitted the moment Marco's forces had breached their defenses. The warehouse lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, turning everything into sharp contrasts of light and dark. Let me be clear, Marco's voice carried through the space, calm and deadly. This is no longer a negotiation. This is me telling you how things will be. Ava's breath caught as she watched him pace before the kneeling men. His suit was pristine despite the violence that had preceded this moment. Every step he took was measured, deliberate. This was the Marco she'd first feared, the one whose reputation had made her hands shake when she'd first started working in his mansion. Every dock, Every street corner, every warehouse from the river to the city limits. It all answers to me now. Marco stopped in front of one of the older bosses, a man whose silver hair was now stained with blood from a cut above his eye. Your territories are mine. Your men are mine. Your profits are mine. A younger boss, barely older than Marco himself, dared to speak up. You can't just... The crack of Marco's gun echoed through the warehouse. The young boss clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. No one else made a sound. I can, Marco continued, as if there had been no interruption. I have. And anyone who questions this new arrangement will serve as an example. He gestured to the far corner of the warehouse, where 3 bodies lay as testament to his earlier warnings. Your choice is simple. Accept my authority or join them. Ava watched as, one by one, the bosses bowed their heads. Some did it quickly, eager to survive. Others fought it until the last moment, pride warring with self-preservation. But in the end, they all submitted. Marco turned to face the entire gathering, his presence filling the space. My men will oversee the transition. You'll receive your new territories and quotas within the week. His voice dropped lower, becoming almost intimate in its menace. Remember this moment. Remember what happened to those who stood against me. Remember what mercy looks like when it comes from my hand. The warehouse doors opened, and Marco's captains began leading the defeated bosses out. Some needed help walking, others moved quickly, eager to escape. Through it all, Marco remained still, a dark center of gravity around which this new empire would orbit. As the space cleared, Marco finally looked up to where Ava stood. Their eyes met across the distance, and Ava saw the shift in him, the subtle softening that only she was privileged to witness. He crossed the warehouse floor with long strides, taking the metal stairs 2 at a time until he reached her. You didn't have to watch, he said softly, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. Ava leaned into his touch, despite the faint traces of gunpowder she could smell on his skin. Yes, I did. I needed to see who you are. All of who you are. Marco's thumb traced her cheekbone, his eyes searching her face for any sign of fear or rejection. And, now that you've seen the monster in his full glory? I see you, she whispered, her hand coming up to cover his. Just you. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though his eyes remained intense. Everything I've done, everything I am, it's all to build something lasting, something that can't be taken away. His free hand gestured to the warehouse below them, to the empire he'd just claimed through blood and bullets. This is just the beginning. Ava's fingers traced the silk sheets of their bed, her mind still processing the events of the past few weeks. The mansion felt different now. No longer just a gilded cage, but a sanctuary she'd chosen. Morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. Marco emerged from the bathroom, his chest still damp from the shower. The scars that marked his body told stories of survival, each one a reminder of the battles he'd fought to reach this moment. He caught her watching him, and his expression softened, the way it only did for her. What are you thinking about? He asked, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. Everything, Ava admitted, sitting up against the headboard. How different everything is now. How different I am. Marco crossed to her side of the bed, kneeling before her. His hands found hers, strong fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. The gentleness of his touch contrasted sharply with the violence she'd witnessed yesterday. This was the duality of him, the man who could order deaths without blinking, yet touch her like she was made of glass. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his dark eyes searching hers. "Choosing this life? Choosing me?" Ava reached out, running her fingers through his damp hair. "I regret what happened with my father," she said honestly. "I regret that blood had to be spilled. But choosing you?" She shook her head. "Never that." Marco pressed a kiss to her palm, his lips warm against her skin. "I never meant for you to be caught in this world," he admitted. "When you first came here, as just another maid, I should have sent you away, protected you from all of this." "I wouldn't have gone," Ava said firmly. "Even then, something about you pulled me in, like gravity." He rose from his knees, settling beside her on the bed. His presence was overwhelming, masculine and powerful. Yet Ava no longer felt intimidated. She'd seen every side of him now. The ruthless boss, the protective brother, the passionate lover. Each facet was equally true, equally him. "The other families have fallen in line," he told her, his arm sliding around her waist. "What happened yesterday? It changes everything. No more territorial disputes, no more constant threats." His fingers traced idle patterns on her hip. "I can finally build something lasting." "And Sophia?" Ava asked, thinking of his sister who'd been at the heart of so much conflict. "Safe," Marco assured her. "The threat to her is gone. She can live her life now, without looking over her shoulder." His expression darkened slightly. "I made sure of that." Ava knew what he meant, had seen firsthand how he'd eliminated those who'd threatened his sister. The violence should have repulsed her, but she understood it now. In their world, love and violence were two sides of the same coin. You protected what was yours, no matter the cost. "And us?" she asked softly. "What happens now?" Marco shifted, moving to cage her body with his own. His arms bracketed her shoulders, his face hovering inches from hers. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper she'd come to love. "We build our empire together. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours too." His lips brushed against her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "No more hiding, no more pretending. You're my queen now, Ava." She tilted her face up to his, accepting his kiss. It was soft at first, almost reverent, before deepening into something more possessive. When they broke apart, his eyes were dark with promise. "You are mine, Ava," he whispered against her lips. "Nothing will ever take you from me." The morning sun painted the mansion's halls in warm gold, highlighting the fresh paint that covered the scars of recent battles. Ava's fingers trailed along the restored wallpaper as she walked beside Marco, their steps in perfect sync. The silence between them was comfortable now, weighted with shared understanding rather than tension. Servants bowed their heads as they passed, a gesture that still felt strange to Ava. She was no longer just another maid in Marco's household. She was his equal, his partner, his queen. The transition hadn't been easy, but she carried herself with newfound confidence, knowing she'd earned her place at his side. Marco's hand rested at the small of her back, protective and possessive. "The West Wing renovations will be done by next week," he said, guiding her toward the garden terrace. "Sophia wants to redecorate her rooms again." Ava smiled, remembering how Marco's sister had thrown herself into the restoration project.
Let her. After everything, she deserves some peace.
The sound of construction echoed from somewhere distant, another reminder of how they were rebuilding, piece by piece. They stepped out onto the terrace, where breakfast waited under the morning sun. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments before Marco's duties demanded his attention. The garden spread before them, immaculate despite the chaos that had touched every other part of their lives. "Your meeting with the Calabrese family is today?" Ava asked, settling into her chair as Marco poured her coffee exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. "Yes," he confirmed, his jaw tightening slightly. "They're the last ones who need to understand the new order of things." His eyes met hers. "Will you join me?" The question carried weight. Before, Marco would have shielded her from such meetings, from the darker aspects of his world. Now, he included her in everything, respecting her choice to stand beside him fully. "Of course," she said, watching his expression soften. "We face everything together now." Marco reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced the diamond ring he'd placed there, not just a symbol of their love, but a declaration to everyone that she was untouchable, protected, his. "The other families are falling in line faster than expected," he told her, his voice low and intimate. "They saw what happened to those who stood against us. No one wants to make that mistake again." Ava nodded, remembering the violence that had preceded their peace. The image of her father's betrayal still stung, but she'd made her choice. The world she lived in now wasn't black and white. It existed in shades of gray, where love and loyalty meant everything. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses from the garden, mixing with the aroma of fresh coffee. The morning was perfect, peaceful. Yet Ava knew better than to take it for granted. They'd fought too hard for this tranquility. "Sophia mentioned wanting to host a dinner next week," she said, changing the subject to lighter matters. "To celebrate the renovations being finished." Marco's lips curved into a rare smile. "Whatever makes her happy." His eyes held a warmth reserved only for family. "Whatever makes you both happy." They finished breakfast slowly, savoring the quiet moment. When they rose to begin their day, Marco pulled Ava close, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Together they walked through their restored mansion, past the fresh paint and new fixtures that covered the scars of war. Every step forward was a victory, every peaceful moment a reward for the battles they'd won. The worst was behind them now, leaving only the future they would build together. Marco's empire was stronger than ever, but more importantly, so was their love. They had faced betrayal, violence, and death, emerging stronger for it. As they moved through their domain, Ava knew with absolute certainty that they had won not just the war, but their chance at happiness. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's restored windows as Marco and Ava stood in his office, overlooking their domain. The city sprawled before them, a mix of old and new, just like their relationship. Smoke no longer clouded the horizon. Instead, construction cranes dotted the skyline, symbols of rebuilding and renewal. Ava leaned against Marco's desk, watching him review the latest security reports. His shoulders were relaxed, a subtle but significant change from the constant tension he'd carried during the war. The powerful Mafia boss was still there in his bearing, in the way his men snapped to attention when he spoke, but there was something softer in his eyes when he looked at her. "The Rousseau family sent another gift," she mentioned, gesturing to the expensive bottle of wine that had arrived that morning. "They're really trying to get on your good side." Marco's lips curved into a slight smirk. "They should be. After what happened to their allies, they know better than to cross us." He set down the reports and moved to stand behind her, his hands settling on her waist. "But let them try to curry favor. It makes things easier." Ava relaxed into his embrace, remembering how far they'd come. The fear she'd once felt in his presence had transformed into something else entirely. Trust, love, and an understanding of the man behind the monster everyone else saw. "Sophia's planning to reopen her art gallery next month," Ava said, turning in his arms to face him. "She's already talking about commissioning new pieces." "Good." Marco's expression softened at the mention of his sister. "She needs something of her own, something separate from all this." He gestured to the papers on his desk, filled with numbers and names that represented his criminal empire. Through the open door, they could hear the bustle of the household staff preparing for the day. The mansion felt alive again, no longer the cold fortress it had been. Ava had helped bring warmth back to these halls, and Marco's people had accepted her as their own. "The other families are watching us," Marco continued, his voice low and intimate. "They're waiting to see what kind of leaders we'll be." His fingers traced patterns on her hip, a gentle touch that belied his dangerous nature. "We need to show them that peace is possible, but only under our terms." Ava nodded, understanding the delicate balance they needed to maintain. The criminal world Marco commanded demanded strength, but also wisdom. They couldn't appear weak, yet they needed to prove that loyalty would be rewarded. "Your father's old associates have been quiet," Marco added, studying her face for any reaction to the mention of her father. "They've accepted the new order." The pain of her father's betrayal had dulled to a manageable ache. Ava had made her choice, chosen her side, and she didn't regret it. "Good," she said simply, meeting Marco's gaze steadily. "They needed to understand that the old ways are done." Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The tenderness, the gesture still surprised her sometimes. How this man who commanded such violence could touch her with such care. "We're building something new," he murmured, dark eyes intense. "Something stronger than what came before." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. One of Marco's men appeared in the doorway, hesitating when he saw them together. "Boss, the car is ready for the meeting." Marco nodded, dismissing him with a look. The man retreated quickly, leaving them alone again. The brief interruption was a reminder of the world they lived in, a world of power plays and careful allegiances where every move had consequences. Marco pulled Ava closer, his forehead resting against hers. In this private moment, they weren't the Mafia boss and his queen. They were just a man and woman who had fought through hell to be together. "We'll write our own story from here on out," he whispered, his words a promise against her lips. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom, casting a golden glow across the silk sheets. Ava watched Marco as he slept, his features relaxed in a way they rarely were when he was awake. The scars on his chest told stories of battles won and lost. But here, in these quiet moments, he wasn't the feared Mafia boss. He was simply hers. 6 months had passed since the war that had torn their city apart. The rebuilding was well underway, both in the streets below and in the criminal empire Marco controlled. Under their joint leadership, the old feuds had given way to an uneasy peace. The other families had learned to respect not just Marco's strength, but the wisdom Ava brought to their decisions. Marco stirred, his hand reaching for her automatically. Even in sleep, he needed to know she was close. His eyes opened, dark and intense as always, but soft with love when they fell on her face. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured, pulling her closer. Ava settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was just remembering how different things were when I first came here. When I was just a maid, terrified of the big, bad boss." His chuckle rumbled through his chest. "You were never just anything, Kara. Even then, you challenged me, saw through me." The household was coming alive around them. Through the open window, they could hear the guards changing shifts, the soft murmur of voices as the staff began their daily routines. This was their kingdom now, built on both fear and loyalty. "Sophia called last night," Ava said, tracing patterns on Marco's skin. "The art gallery's doing well. She's talking about opening a second location." Pride flickered across Marco's face. His sister's safety and happiness had been the catalyst for so much of what had happened, but now she was thriving in her own right. Good. She deserves to have something that's completely her own. They lay in comfortable silence for a while longer, enjoying the luxury of a peaceful morning. Such moments were precious in their world, where danger and responsibility were constant companions. A knock at the door broke the spell. "Boss," one of Marco's men called through the door. "The Colombo family's representative is here for the meeting." Marco's expression hardened slightly, the mask of the Mafia boss sliding back into place. But when he looked at Ava, his eyes were still soft. "Time to face the world, amore mio." As they dressed, Ava watched Marco transform. Each weapon he concealed, each piece of expensive clothing he donned, was another layer of the armor he wore to protect their world. She had her own transformation to make, from the woman who shared his bed to the queen who helped him rule. The Colombo representative waited in Marco's office, a man old enough to remember the bloody days before Marco had united the families. He rose when they entered, bowing slightly to both of them. The respect in his gesture wasn't just for Marco's position. It was for the power they wielded together. "Don Rinaldi, Donna Bennett," he greeted them formally. The old title still felt strange to Ava sometimes, but she had learned to wear it with grace. As Marco took his seat behind the massive desk, Ava moved to stand behind him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. It was a position that made their unity clear. She wasn't just the boss's woman. She was his partner in all things. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky as they discussed territory agreements and profit shares. The violence that had marked their early days together had given way to something more civilized, but no less dangerous. Every word, every gesture was part of a delicate dance of power and control. Through it all, Ava felt Marco's strength flowing into her, just as her presence tempered his more brutal instincts. They had found a balance that worked, a way to rule that combined his force with her diplomacy. The empire they were building would be stronger for it. The morning sun painted Marco's office in shades of gold, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk where deals were made and empires were managed. Ava stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below come to life. Their city. From this height, everything looked peaceful, ordered, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd emerged from 6 months ago. Marco's reflection appeared behind her in the glass. Even now, after everything they'd been through, the sight of him still made her breath catch. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "The Colombo meeting went well," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Better than expected." "Because of you." His voice was low, intimate. "You see solutions where I only see threats." She turned in his arms, studying his face. The hard edges were still there. They had to be in their world. But there was softness, too, reserved only for her.
We balance each other. That's why it works.
The empire they'd built together was unlike anything the city had seen before. Marco's strength and tactical brilliance, paired with Ava's diplomatic touch, had created something new. A criminal enterprise that operated more like a corporation than a traditional mafia family. The old guards had resisted at first, but success was hard to argue with. Through the open door, they could hear the bustling activity of the mansion. Guards changing shifts, staff preparing for the day, the constant hum of business being conducted. Their world had expanded far beyond the confines of these walls, but this would always be the heart of their operation. Sophia called this morning, Marco said, moving to pour them both coffee from the silver service on his desk. The art gallery's expansion is ahead of schedule. Ava accepted the cup, warming her hands around it.
She sounds happy. Really happy, Marco. That's what you fought for all along, isn't it? To give her a chance at a normal life?
His expression softened at the mention of his sister. I never thought it was possible. To have both. The power to protect what's mine, and the freedom to love openly. He set his cup down, drawing Ava closer. You changed everything. The weight of their shared history hung between them. Every scar, every battle, every moment of doubt and triumph had led them here. They'd faced down enemies from within and without, survived betrayal and bloodshed, and emerged stronger. A discreet knock at the door preceded Marco's consigliere, Antonio, entering with a stack of reports. The quarterly numbers, boss, and the security updates you requested. Marco nodded, his public face sliding back into place, but his hand remained at the small of Ava's back, a subtle reminder of their connection. They moved together to the desk, assuming the positions that had become second nature. Marco behind the massive desk, Ava at his side, both of them radiating the quiet confidence of absolute authority. As they reviewed the reports, Ava marveled at how natural it felt now. The familiar dance of power and control, the delicate balance of force and diplomacy. She'd come so far from the frightened maid who'd first walked these halls. Now, she moved through this dangerous world with the grace of someone born to it. The morning light strengthened, catching the diamond on her left hand, Marco's ring, a symbol of both love and power. In their world, the two were inseparable. Their love had been forged in fire, tested by blood and betrayal, and had emerged unbreakable. Marco caught her looking at the ring and reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the diamond. Even in this formal setting, with business waiting to be conducted, he couldn't help but touch her. Their eyes met, exchanging volumes in a single glance. They'd built this empire together, stone by stone, sacrifice by sacrifice. Now they stood at its helm, more powerful than either of them had imagined possible, their love having transformed them both into something greater than they were alone. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.